Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. My guest today is Timothy W. Jones, Majority Leader of the Missouri State House of Representatives and a representative from Missouri's 89th District. The 89th District includes Eureka, Wildwood, and parts of West St. Louis County. He also serves as the chairman of the Ethics Committee and the Special Standing Committee on Election Contests. Representative Jones has passed dozens of important pieces of legislation, including Missouri Healthcare Freedom Act. He's also a very successful attorney with the law firm of Doster Ullom. Today's discussion will center on the accomplishments of the recent legislative session and the prospect for Missouri's political future. Representative Jones, welcome to Conversation.
Thank you for having me again, Lee. It's great to be here.
Again, yeah, it's been almost 3 years, 33 months. I looked it up.
Yeah, I was looking back at the last show we did, and I can't believe how much has changed.
Yes, at that time, in the script and the introduction, I looked at it and says, well, he's a very successful freshman. And now, because of the way Missouri's political structure is set up, you've moved all the way from just being a freshman. I think you had chairmanships in those days, but now you are the leader of the Republican Party in the House, and perhaps if the Republicans hold the majority in 2013, then you might be the Speaker?
Yes, that is, God willing, that is the plan that we are currently pursuing. And it's very good to, in any business, and running a $23 billion state government is very similar to running a very large corporation because of the things that we're tasked with doing every year. Mm-hmm. It's important for us to have a good business succession plan in a term-limited world. Missouri, as you know, has term limits, and we arrive on the scene, and 8 years later, some say it's a long 8 years, some say it's a short 8 years. You have to leave whether you want to or not because of the term limit. So it's very important for us as our leaders exit every 2 years to have that next set of potential leaders ready to take the reins.
Well, as you know, this show is also heard in Illinois, and in Illinois they do not have term limits, and some of the people in Illinois I've had them on the show, and they complain of Missouri that we never know who to talk to anymore. There's nobody over there for any period of time, and the moment that they come into any kind of position of responsibility, they're gone. Whereas here in, in Illinois, it's like there's a fellow named Michael Madigan, who's been like forever the Speaker of the House. Now, that may be a little long, but I'm just wondering if you and your colleagues think that 8 years in the House is too short.
I can definitely argue both sides of the issue on that.
You're an attorney.
And being a good lawyer, that's right, that's my job. But now that I've lived it, I can definitely see the pros and cons by having a term limit or not. And I could also argue that Missouri's term limit is too short. I think a term limit to some degree is a good thing. I guess you would call me a term limit kind of person. But 8 years has tended to cause some unintended consequences to the negative that I think should be addressed. I've actually gotten to know some of my Illinois colleagues very recently, and we're trying to establish that kind of relationship so they do know who's over here. Mm-hmm. And I've spoken with Republicans and Democrats over here. And they would tell you that, even though we have a few people who have been in the legislature for a long time, like Speaker Madigan, I think he's going on to 25 years, many of the legislators in the Illinois House and Senate also come and go. Every 10 to 15 years, some are there only for a few years. Mm-hmm. So, they will argue that the real term limit's at the ballot box. And the reason Missouri has term limits, that was a byproduct of a big push back in the 90s to get congressional term limits.
They missed the mark.
That failed,
right.
But because of a lot of states had it structured a certain way on their ballot, we ended up with the side effect of state term limits, where many people think, well, some states maybe need them, some states don't, but many, many people argue we need them on the federal level.
Well, it definitely, I have noticed it really causes, a rapid turnover. I mean, you've got guys And you even call yourselves freshmen, sophomores, juniors, and seniors.
Just like high school.
Yeah, right. So, so the freshmen, they come in fresh and they rarely have much responsibilities except to, learn and vote. But by the time you're a sophomore, they might be subcommittee chairmen, and then the juniors, then they're committee chairmen, right?
Correct. And then once you obtain all that knowledge finally, I would say by late in your sophomore year, your junior year, you pretty much know what's going on. You're moving your agenda forward, you're helping the caucus, you're helping the body as a whole. Then you have one more term and you have to leave.
Bye-bye. Right.
You either try and go over to the Senate, or you may
Which you're allowed then 8 more years.
Correct.
If you change chambers.
Correct. Although that is a very constrictive funnel, because there are 163 House members, but only 34 senators.
Right.
So it's a much smaller group of people statewide. If you think about that, 34 people out of the entire state's population of about 6 million make up the Senate. And then there's a handful of statewide offices people could run for. So it does create sometimes some very strange issues. You start wondering who does have the institutional knowledge in Jefferson City. If it's not the legislators who have been there for 8 years or less, who is it? Is it the lobbyists? Is it the bureaucrats? Is it the staff people?
As I say, is it the LAs?
Is it the LAs?
The legislative assistants that move from, they move from some senior who's termed out. Next thing you know, they start working for some freshman.
That's correct. And I've had these discussions with the national term limits folks. There's a national organization that travels around, and we've had debate on all these issues. And for every issue I bring up, like, well, who then does run this legislature if you've only got 8 years of experience at the most? I mean, that's at the most.
Right.
This year, Speaker Tilley's class, they're the senior class right now, there are only 18 people in the Missouri House on the Republican side that have 7 years of experience or more. And I argue with those folks about, the good and the bad, and they have an answer for everything, but I think they have blinders on to some extent as to what an 8-year term limit really does to the institutional knowledge of the legislative body.
Well, okay, so you mentioned the Senate and how few 34 members there are and how important a senator. As a matter of fact, I recently heard a discussion about how important the senators are, or at least how in their own minds.
That's our joke.
Right, but it's actually true though. In the Missouri Senate, any one senator can put a stop to a piece of legislation, can't
Correct.
they? I mean, it can go all the way. How long does it take in the House for a piece of legislation normally to be introduced and then to be passed to the point where it can be moved to the upper chamber?
That's a great question. We have, and the way to sort of think about this is to kind of give you the framework of what exists in Missouri. We have one of the largest houses of representatives in the country with 163 members. We have one of the smallest state senates with only 34 members. So it's a bit of a strange dynamic there, where there are 163 House members, so whoever's in the majority really has to operate like a team. In the Senate, you're correct. There are 34 of them. Every single one of them is very important, whether they are a conservative Republican, a moderate Republican, a conservative Democrat, or a liberal Democrat. Every single one of those voices over there can, using the filibuster tool, stop any piece of legislation in its tracks.
So it took you how long to pass, and then it goes over there and...
We can sometimes, because of the way the House is set up, we can move a piece of legislation fairly quickly. If House leadership decides that this bill relating to telecommunications needs to be done this year, and the leadership will go to the caucus and explain why, and because no one has the filibuster power, because the leadership in the House controls the floor, controls the agenda, with the consent of the majority, we always have to have a majority agreeing. Once we come to that decision, we move the legislation forward, and we can move things through the House fairly quickly. I would say from the time of introduction to the time of passage, 5 to 6 weeks we've moved a bill out.
Okay, so that's the shortest right there. So 5, 6 weeks of work goes over to the Senate, and one individual over there says, too bad.
That's correct.
It gets shelved.
That's correct. We currently have about, I think, 26 Republican senators. Let's say 25 Republican senators say, we like this idea, we should move this legislation forward.
So that's like 2/3 of the entire body.
Correct. the Republicans currently have a supermajority in the state Senate. And however, one member, whether they're on the Republican side or the Democratic side of the aisle, could say, you know, I want that bill changed or stopped or amended or adjusted, and until that happens, I'm going to filibuster. And when you have a citizen legislature, like we do in Missouri, which I do think is a good thing, but a citizen legislature is only in session for about 4.5 months out of the year and only 4 days a week. That comes down to about 77 legislative days at the most to accomplish everything you need to do. The $23 billion state budget, and to at least look at and address the 1,500 plus bills that are filed every year.
Pause right there. Why in the world is there that much wrong with the state that we need 1,500 adjustments to state law?
No, not at all. A lot of those bills are tweaking small issues that people have realized that, you know, a word needs to be added here to address a situation that wasn't thought of. To be honest with you, a couple of our representatives over the last couple of years have taken upon themselves to remove statutes, to get rid of obsolete bills, to get rid of duplicative language, heavy, cumbersome stuff that needs to be removed. One of my colleagues, Representative Cole McNary from the West County area, has been one of those fellows who's kind of championed that, and he's had some large bills every year that I've supported that actually get rid of statutes. And a lot of my constituents say that's a good thing. You know, a lot of my constituents will say, for every bill you pass, Tim, we want you to take 2 or 3 of them off the books.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. So, but there are other bills, and so let's get down to some details here. For example, in this past session, there was a bill, and by the way, just so that the audience knows, I get from your office a what's it called, the majority minute.
Majority minute during session.
Which you list the things that the majority is working on.
Yes.
And one of the things that I noticed early on, which was kind of like weird, was something to do with sawmills.
Yes.
Yeah, and it was like, whoa. So I'll just explain from an outsider's point of view what
Sure.
I thought I saw, then you explain from the inside what actually happened. From an outsider's point of view, it's like all of a sudden a bill appears that says, yeah, these guys have property tax at the normal rate that everybody has to pay for land, and that the rule needs to be changed so that they pay a lesser percentage of property tax in the future. And then I think the bill was finally passed. That's what I thought I saw. Now tell me what it is I actually saw.
You're fairly accurate, and I will tell you that bill has actually been around for about 3 to 4 years. My colleague from South Central Missouri, Representative David Day, who has been a great colleague to work with. He's a senior. He's in that senior year.
When I was 18.
Yes.
Yes.
He's in his 7th year currently in the House, and he has sponsored that bill. We have actually, Missouri has still a fairly thriving sawmill industry in the south central part of the state where all of our forests are. And what the problem is that, you know, we are competing worldwide now with everything we do. Everything we do in this state, any industry we have, with the shrinking of the globe, the advent of the internet, everything we do, we're not in a bubble anymore where we can just pretend that our farms are, you know, don't have to compete globally. So that adjustment would allow sawmill operators to be classified for taxation purposes under agriculture instead of heavy industrial or manufacturing.
The land you're talking about.
Correct.
Land
Land
use.
Which is probably a proper application. It's reducing a taxation burden on property owners. And to be honest with you, the fiscal note to the state was minimal compared to the fiscal advantage to the sawmill operators, to the individual operators.
But there are some who ask the question, Republicans are constantly saying that, oh, those Democrats, boy, they're constantly taking money out of the Treasury to give to their friends. How is it that Republicans answer in a case like this, where it appears that sawmill operators, which are small businessmen who are friends of Republicans, is there not money that's not coming into the Treasury? So in other words, money's coming out of the Treasury in order to benefit Republican friends.
I would say it's a philosophical difference between the parties, whereas I believe that if you preserve that industry and encourage it to grow by helping it be classified, and what they believe, and I'll just have to take their word for it because that's not my constituency, and Representative Day could explain better, but what I believe they would say is by classifying us in a more proper light, then we're able to compete better. We're able to grow our businesses here in Missouri, stay in Missouri. We will hire more people who will pay more taxes, which will increase the base and the amount of taxes that go into government. If we do nothing for them and simply increase their taxes, what Senator Harry Reid might call revenue enhancements, then I would argue you're punishing that industry, you're encouraging it not to grow, not to hire more people, and perhaps to shut some of them down. So I believe it's more of a difference between the free market philosophy versus tax more of those who people believe can pay more taxes.
Okay. Let's move on to another subject. The Metropolitan Sewer District of St. Louis.
One of my favorite.
That's right. You've had.
I think they're in my fan club.
That's right. You've had some dealings with them. I remember that this was 2 years ago or something.
Maybe 3 years ago.
3 years ago, you and Dwight Scharnhorst and a few other state reps took them on when they arbitrarily changed the rules regarding how they were going to charge for stormwater runoff.
Correct.
They measured the amount of permeable versus impermeable land that you had, and then were charging, and there was some lawsuit, and eventually they had to give that up. So now they've come back and they have announced, and you'll see in the Post-Dispatch these one-page items from them, a whole page, saying that, yeah, we're about to raise rates. And not just a little bit. Right now, people on average are paying about $25-27 a month for sewer service. It is estimated that in their writings that by 2016, which isn't that far away, that we're now going to be $47-48 for the same service. I've talked to engineers that say, it could be more like 100. What is it what do you think's going on here, and why is it that that the federal government, and it's the EPA that's forcing this situation, why do you think that the federal government thinks it's important that people pay $50-100 a month for sewer instead of 25?
Well, I think it goes back to the argument that I had with them back on the impervious surface runoff charge that they created several years ago, which I argued against as being improper and even unconstitutional as applied, and that's why I wanted.
Well, they are a government.
Well,
they're not a utility. They do.
That's correct.
They make rules very similar to the legislature.
That's correct.
I mean,
that's correct. And so when I wanted to pass a bill that would change the way they applied that, they did not like that. I'm happy to say that a court vindicated my position. Our law did pass, and we actually worked out a compromise with them. But then we were fully vindicated when a court said, yes, that is an unconstitutional taking to an extent for services that you do not provide. I think the root cause of the problem is, and I know there's a lot of good people at MSD who are working hard every day to try and provide necessary services.
Most of them are.
But you're correct. They are tied too heavily to federal mandates, unfunded federal mandates, and the EPA. And then they struggle here on the local level to try and implement that as best they can. I think one of the root causes of the problems is it goes back into the 1970s, because I had to research this when I was dealing with this issue, is that MSD has largely taken on much more than it can handle. It's bitten off more than it can chew. If you look at its actual geographic boundaries,
it's huge.
It's massive.
Yeah.
And if you look at what they actually service, it's maybe half of that or less. So they're tasked with providing services, quote unquote, to a great area, but in reality, they only provide services to a much smaller area, mainly inside the I-270 corridor.
But the real problem is that when MSD was put together, there was actually like 40 or more individual sewer systems throughout St. Louis City and County.
Correct.
Which they mashed together.
That's
some
right.
of them 100 years old at that time, some of them only 30, 40 years old at that time. And they're having to deal with the consequences of that, and they haven't spent the kind of infrastructure money up till now. And
that's right.
Now
and
the EPA is saying, spend the money.
And it's another great example of probably a good government idea 100 years ago that has never been changed. And now you do have a lot of advancements in this area of engineering and of water flow systems. A lot of cities, counties, they're managing the stormwater, sewers, and the runoff themselves. And so if MSD were really wise, what I think they should do is honestly think about the service area that they can really take care of and de-annex from everything that they can't handle. Mm-hmm. And this is where the local control Republican in me comes out. Let those cities and those county areas who are already taking on a lot of that chore just deal with it themselves without the additional government expense and burden and regulations of an MSD umbrella over all of them. I think they need to really be honest about what they can handle.
Have you read Massachusetts versus EPA ever?
I have not.
Yeah, I would suggest take a little time to look at that sometime. The reason being, the courts come up and, you and I, we're sitting right here, we're talking, and as we talk, we exhale carbon dioxide.
Yes.
The Supreme Court of the United States has said that EPA has a right to regulate carbon dioxide emissions. Of course, they're not talking about us.
I know the case you're talking about now. I've read the Cliff Notes, basically.
But they are, the Supreme Court is giving to the administrative portion of the federal government the right to say this particular gas, which is normal in the world system, that the federal government can say yay or nay, and something similar is going on with MSD, where they're saying that, well, we have artificially created these limits on the parts per million of sewage or whatever can go out into the water, and it's artificial, and in order to meet these artificial goals, you have to institute new systems that are going to cost billions.
Correct. And that's the what I would say the 2,000-pound invisible pink elephant in the room. Politicians and every time we have campaigns and we're working on the next stump speeches, everyone focuses on, and the American people focus on tax policy quite heavily. Everybody's very aware, you like taxes, you don't, you want to raise them, you want to lower them. Everybody focuses a lot on labor policy. We had a big debate this past session in Jeff City about Missouri being a right to work versus a union shop. The third prong of that, what I call my third rail, is the regulatory that you're speaking about. Mm-hmm. That is become a massive burden on society, and people don't see it, they don't know about it, but trust me, small business owners are very much aware of it. Mm-hmm. And it is one of the biggest cost drivers to small business and to industry in our country, and is driving a lot of that out of our state and out of our country.
Mm-hmm. I want to switch gears for just a moment. I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal about the U.S. Postal Service. Eureka is a pretty small town, isn't it? I forget what the population there is.
Yes, about 7,000.
And it has its own post office.
Yes, it does.
And now the postal, and we got about 5 minutes here. The postal system is talking about closing about 3,600 post offices soon in small communities. You aware of this, and how do you feel about perhaps Eureka and other small towns in Missouri suddenly winding up without their post office anymore, and then moving it over to like Walgreens or some other location?
Well, I think as with everything in this day and age, where we've gone these last 10, 20 years with major advancements in so many levels, the U.S. Postal Service is going to have to figure out how to compete and continue to be relevant in the era of internet. And I was speaking to one of my law colleagues the other day, and he said to me, when was the last time you actually sat down, typed a letter, printed it out, put it in an envelope, and stamped and mailed it? I said, less and less every day, because nowadays we simply prepare those same letters, we scan them, and we email them.
Right.
And in 10 seconds, you've accomplished what used to take 2 to 3 days, and you can get an answer much more. So everything's moving a lot faster. And the post office has to decide, do we need brick and mortar buildings every half mile, couple miles in every community where we're paying rent and overhead, and we're ignoring, the internet and the massive amount of digital traffic that occurs through communication. Now, of course, I would want to keep our little post office in Eureka. I use it almost every single day. But we actually did have a post office close that was in one of our little unincorporated areas called Allenton, out by Six Flags. It was a little village. And that was a huge bone of contention the last few years, but we finally realized, the people came to the understanding that we do not need a major post office in Eureka and then a satellite post office literally 2 miles away down in Allenton. And so I think that consolidation is going to have to continue if the Postal Service wants to remain relevant and will continue to compete with all of the big carriers. I won't start mentioning them, but there's many of them, and to compete with that, and to compete with all of the new technology advancements that come out every day where people can communicate without using that snail mail.
Here in the last couple of minutes, and we're down to that now, I always give my guests an opportunity. If we haven't covered a certain area that you want to talk about, please do.
Well, I think, Lee, one of the things that has been forefront in a lot of people's minds over the last couple of years has dealt with the increased attention paid to state governments. And I only say that because I'm now in the midst of that, what feels like tornado sometimes. But with, again, the ability to reach out and speak directly to your legislators via email now, to not have
snail
to
mail.
Yes,
right.
To not have
websites.
to, which that's a double-edged sword, because back in the old days people probably spent a lot less time doing all that, but now if you want to complain about a bill, boy, you can do that in 10 seconds. And so that has led to a lot of good things by increased participation, but also when you mention some of these bills that you see, a lot of times people see a title of a bill and they instantly jump to a conclusion as to what that bill might do, when in fact it may actually do the opposite. So we do have to spend a lot more time explaining to educated citizens who want to become more educated about the public process. So I think it's a good thing that people have gotten more involved on the state level. And you mentioned in your introduction that we pushed forward the Missouri Healthcare Freedom Act a couple of years ago in response.
Just briefly explain what is the function of that, and I mean really brief.
Sure. If in 2014, if the Obamacare legislation is still on the books, we believe that will protect Missourians from being subjected to the individual mandate in that bill.
The individual mandate meaning that you have to buy
some form of insurance. Right. 72% of Missourians voted for the Missouri Healthcare Freedom Act, which I believe shows they voted against the federal takeover.
But most people do have insurance, though, right? I mean, the vast majority of people actually do have some form of insurance.
The issue there, which we really learned on the state level, was it has to do with cost. It's healthcare cost.
Right.
That's the problem we need to address.
I'll have to have you back here and have a longer discussion about that. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you for having me again. I really appreciate it.
And to my audience, I've been speaking with State Representative Tim Jones of Missouri. He is the leader of the Republican House in the state of Missouri. And for those of you who are regulars, please come back next week. Thanks. Bye.